With the Raiders dealing with a lot of change in recent years and a lot of key injuries last season, the one consistent thing has been Adam Butler. Butler, since coming to the Silver and Black, has been one of the best defensive players for the team. He has been one of the leaders of the defensive line and the defense. He is currently a free agent. Earlier today, he appeared on a podcast where he expressed his desire to return to the Raiders. Apart from that, the Raiders also made an important coaches change. So let's explore what's happening in the Raiders and how it will affect the upcoming season. What's up, buddies? Welcome back. If you are new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We cover all AFC West news here on this channel. Before moving to the Butler, let me share with you that Champ Kelly and Raiders mutually agree to part ways. This is quite significant. Although it's framed as a mutual decision, it seems like it was largely driven by John Spytek wanting to bring in his own person to manage the front office. Kelly, once the interim GM, did have some general manager interviews, but his departure from the Raiders marks a clear shift in the leadership structure. Now, Spytek takes full control, and it will be interesting to see if he adopts the approach he had with the Buccaneers, where he was empowered to make key decisions, especially in the draft. One thing to watch will be how the Raiders handle their quarterback situation moving forward. Similar to the Buccaneers' path, they could opt for free agency to bring in a veteran quarterback, which would allow them to focus on other areas of the roster with their draft picks. If they go this route, it would give them the flexibility to strengthen the team elsewhere, rather than targeting a developmental quarterback in the draft. The looming free agency period will also bring a lot of changes. With players like Gardner Minshew potentially hitting the market and the status of guys like Trayvon Mullen coming up, it's going to be a critical time for the Raiders. The hope is that the team can re-sign their key players, particularly Mullen, and avoid letting them test free agency. If the Raiders can take care of themselves while adding solid pieces through the draft and free agency, they could build a contender and ultimately aim for a Super Bowl. The departure of Champ Kelly marks the beginning of a new era for the Raiders, and it's all about how they execute this transition under Spytek leadership. Let's see if this leads to better decision-making and a more successful roster moving forward. Okay, now back to the Butler. He sat down with Hondo Carpenter and shared some heartfelt thoughts. He mentioned that returning to the Raiders would be a dream come true, emphasizing his love for the team and the organization. It's clear he genuinely wants to be back in Las Vegas, and if you're in the Raiders front office, it's hard to ignore a player like this who has shown consistent improvement and passion for the team. When you look at Butler's performance over the last few seasons, he's steadily improved, not just with the Raiders, but throughout his career. This past season, Butler was statistically among the top run defenders in the NFL. According to Pro Football Focus, he ranked 12th in run stops among defensive tackles. While he may not be the kind of nose tackle who dominates double-team blocks, he's still made an impact against the run. On top of that, he ranked in the top 15 for sacks and quarterback hits for his position, which highlights his versatility. Considering his solid performance and desire to stay with the team, bringing Butler back seems like an easy decision for the Raiders. One area where the Raiders struggled last season was having their defensive line play as a cohesive unit. The Raiders' defensive line had all the pieces last season to be something special. With players like Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins, Malcolm Kuntz, and Adam Butler, the potential was there for an incredible unit. Heading into last year, if Adam Butler was considered your weakest starting defensive lineman, it spoke volumes about the depth and talent of the group. Unfortunately, things didn't quite come together as expected. Looking ahead, there's hope that the Raiders can bring back the same core for the upcoming season. To make that happen, Butler would need to be re-signed since he's currently a free agent. Retaining him might be more realistic than keeping someone like Malcolm Kuntz, especially considering Butler's value and likely lower cost. At 30 years old, Butler has plenty of experience but isn't carrying the wear and tear of a player who entered the league at a younger age. He had a later start in the NFL after spending extra time in college and easing into significant playing time earlier in his career. That's important because while he's technically 30, his NFL mileage isn't as high as other players at that age. What Butler brings to the table is his ability as an elite pass rusher, particularly in one-on-one situations. Offensive lines must account for players like Crosby and Wilkins, often dedicating extra blockers or chips to slow them down. For instance, if a team like the Los Angeles Chargers schemes a 7-man pass protection, they might have a tight end chip on Crosby, a running back help on Kuntz, and the offensive line slide toward Wilkins. That would leave Adam Butler in a one-on-one matchup against an interior offensive lineman, and Butler has shown time and again that he can win those matchups. This ability makes him a valuable piece for the Raiders to retain moving forward. If you go back and watch Adam Butler's tape against players like Joe Thuney or Trey Smith, you'll see just how effective he can be. Butler has consistently shown he's tough to block because of his quickness, speed, and explosiveness. He moves exceptionally well for a defensive tackle, which makes him a valuable asset on the line. If you're the Las Vegas Raiders, re-signing Butler should be a priority. Another Another thing worth noting is that not every player who joins the Raiders expresses a strong desire to stay. Free agents often spend a year or two in Las Vegas before moving on, and even some players drafted by the team have left after their contracts were up. For example, Josh Jacobs chose to leave despite reportedly being offered a deal similar to what he signed with the Packers. It's not every day you have a player like Butler who not only wants to stay with the Raiders but openly expresses it. That level of commitment is rare. From what I've seen and heard, Butler is also a high-character player. It's clear he's passionate about the game and wants to succeed. He's not just here for the paycheck, he genuinely cares about being great. Cam Newton once pointed out that not every player in the league shares that mindset. Some are only in it for the money. That's not the case with Butler, which is another reason why the Raiders should prioritize bringing him back. Now, shifting gears a bit, I want to highlight some of the defensive tackle prospects in the 2025 NFL Draft. Using the NFL Mock Draft database, we'll look at rankings based on mock drafts from analysts like Mel Kiper, Jordan Reed, Matt Miller, and others. Keep in mind, these rankings aren't definitive, but they provide a general idea of how the top prospects stack up heading into the draft. Holding the 6th overall pick in each round gives you plenty of options. The big question is, what's your priority? If Malcolm Kunsey doesn't return, do you target a defensive end? Or if the focus shifts to quarterback, does a player like Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, or perhaps Shedeur Sanders become the top choice? It depends on how the draft unfolds and the team's needs. But let's say the Raiders address quarterback or defensive end first. This leaves the possibility of selecting a defensive tackle at 6th overall or waiting until the 2nd round. This year's defensive tackle class is being hailed as one of the strongest in recent memory. Mason Graham stands out as a name frequently tied to the Raiders' 6th pick, though I'm not entirely sold on the idea. While Graham is talented, I wouldn't say he's worth that 6th overall pick. There are other defensive tackles in this class who may also go in the 1st round, but none stand out as must-draft players at that spot for the Raiders. People are calling him a top 3 pick and labeling him the best defensive lineman in this class, but I don't fully agree. When I evaluate defensive tackles, I think about players like Jalen Carter. Carter was a top 3 prospect in his class because his tape showed elite traits, pass rush moves, technique, and a polished plan on every snap. With Mason Graham, I don't see the same level of refinement. While he's on the stronger side, there's more to evaluate. Mason Graham is undeniably strong and powerful, with a solid punch, but that doesn't always translate seamlessly to the NFL level. The reason? In the NFL, everyone is strong, so having just that one standout trait isn't enough to dominate. While Graham is someone the Raiders might consider, I'm not entirely convinced he's worth the 6th overall pick. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if he falls outside the top 10. If the Raiders are looking for value in the 2nd round, there are several intriguing options. Even if they retain Adam Butler, I'd still target some of these 2nd-round prospects to bolster the defensive line. One player who stands out to me is Deone Walker from Kentucky. He's a great fit for what the Raiders need, especially when you consider their current roster. Christian Wilkins, for example, is built to play the 3 technique position where he can excel. What the Raiders need, though, is someone who complements Wilkins, a player who can line up at the 1 technique or nose tackle spot. This type of player needs to be strong, physical, and capable of handling double teams from centers and guards. For those unfamiliar, the difference between these interior positions and others on the line is the type of matchups they face. A defensive tackle playing inside like a 1 technique or nose often deals with double teams from the center and guard, players who are built for power. In contrast, edge players or 3 technique tackles might face matchups against tackles or tight ends who are typically quicker but not as strong. Walker checks all the boxes for a 1 technique or nose tackle. He's strong, physical, and fits the mold of a player who can anchor the interior. If he's available in the 2nd round, the Raiders should jump on the opportunity. That said, there's a chance Walker could go in the top 20 to 25 picks, given his upside and fit for various teams. Still, if he's there, he'd be an excellent addition, even with Butler on the roster. Keep in mind that Adam Butler is more similar in style to Christian Wilkins. Walker, on the other hand, brings something different. He's the opposite of those two, which adds balance to the defensive line. It's worth noting that John Jenkins, another interior lineman, is a free agent this year. Jenkins didn't have a strong season, which further highlights the need to improve this position group. Adding someone like Walker could solidify the defensive front for the Raiders moving forward. So, what do you think? Who will take over the assistant GM position for the Raiders? And should the Raiders resign Adam Butler? Let's kick off discussion in comment section.